Her Story is a program that explores women, leadership, and healthcare.
Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us at Her Story. I'm so excited to partner with you on this discussion because I believe you've been an amazing leader in healthcare and as a founder and CEO and really driving change in this space, especially for women's health. And I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit. But, Carolyn, I'd love for you to take us in the beginning. I know that you have a very special family and how you kind of grow up. Would love to hear from the beginning from you.
Sure, excited to be here and share a little bit of my story and the Tia story. So it's interesting. When I first started Tia about 4 years ago, I didn't think that I would be an entrepreneur. I wasn't one of those people who thought, I'm going to start a company. I'm just like looking for the idea. I'm trying to figure out how to dive in. I didn't think about it like that. It just kind of happened serendipitously. Based off of my own kind of personal healthcare challenges that made me frustrated with the healthcare system, which I think is a common healthcare founder story. In retrospect, thinking about what actually potentially subconsciously put me on this pathway, I think there were some interesting things about my childhood and family upbringing in particular that made me comfortable, I would say, jumping out of the airplane, so to speak, into startup land. So I grew up in a family that was very entrepreneurial, and I would say my parents very much took a contrarian approach to thinking about life, careers, risk taking, taking the path less followed, so to speak. And so that kind of was drilled into me at an early age. And I didn't really realize it until I started a company. And then 2 years later, my older brother started a company. And then my little brother didn't quite start a company, but he's in the music world working for himself. So he might as well started a company. So all three of us, let's just say, don't have normal jobs. And so it
kind of entrepreneurs.
Yes. And so in reflecting on this, I think the question is why? And I think so much of those things that you're exposed to, I didn't grow up in Silicon Valley world, but I grew up in an environment in which risk-taking and thinking about the world differently was dinner table conversation, so to speak. And there wasn't one particular moment, which only now, again, in retrospect, am I realize how lucky I really was when I was considering leaving my job at Google to jump into startup land and start Tia. I had this very early idea for what Tia might be, and shared it with my parents kind of nervously, like most young 20 somethings who have a stable job might share with their parents, like, should I leave my really good job and have no income and take this big risk? And my dad didn't flinch for a second before saying, like, you should quit your job tomorrow, like you should go do that. And it was not really the reaction I expected him to give me. But I think really I was so surprised, and it it made me comfortable taking that risk. And I wasn't even so much looking for that validation, but as I think about, I was overconfident as an early entrepreneur, and then through every challenge that then I then quickly faced on the very long and treacherous journey that it is becoming a healthcare founder, building a company, having that emotional safety net in a family that I think was comfortable with failure, and making big bets was, I think, something that made me willing to try.
Yeah. I think I've talked a lot about a village at times, and family is such a big part of that. And it's not just the, if you will, the push out of the airplane, but also knowing that they'd be there for you through all the kind of ups and downs as being a founder is just so critical.
Yeah, the emotional roller coaster, I think, is the hardest part of it. Personally, I mean, there's financial risk, there's all these risks, right? But I think as someone who was like the, very meticulous student, never failed, had perfect grades, did all the things right, the idea of potentially failing at something was an emotional burden, continues to be one. I think a fear of failure drives a lot of entrepreneurs to be a little bit crazy, but in a good way usually. But I think there's a balance of, it's like, can be motivating, but you also need to manage that with this support in some regard. That's like, wait, but if you do fail, what's the worst that can happen? Did you fail for the right reasons? And I think that's kind of the thing I ask myself now that I'm 4 years into this.
Yeah. I mean, as you looked at the journey, like, would you call yourself an accidental or intentional leader? Have you known you've always wanted to be a leader throughout the career because of this family upbringing, or you kind of walked into it, in retrospect?
I always wanted to be a leader. I just didn't know I wanted a leader and entrepreneur were not the same thing in my mind. And so I think I had a really amazing leadership opportunities while at Google. And I think there was a moment that in this conversation of should I quit my, a then dream job to go to this next dream job that was higher risk, kind of had this conversation. I remember with my dad explaining like, well, I feel like I have so much, influence and impact and work on this billion user products and like all of these things. And he kind of asked me, like, I remember him this conversation vividly. Do you want to have influence or do you want to be the decision maker? Like, do you like making decisions or do you like influencing other people who make decisions? Because that's really what it's about. The difference, like you can influence other people who make decisions, and ultimately, like if you made the wrong decision, Google's going to be just fine. Or do you want to make the decision yourself and then live or die by those consequences? And that I think is a very stark picture of the difference of entrepreneurial oriented leadership. And I was interested in trying that out. And 4 years in, I haven't regretted that choice.
Wow, that's amazing. So walk us through, Carolyn, because first tell us a little bit about your job at Google, because I think you did come from the technology world, and then you had this experience, which I'd love for you to kind of talk about. And then you went into healthcare. And I'd argue TIA is the culmination of both those worlds of healthcare, technology, and quite frankly, consumer. Walk us through that whole decision path in kind of building TIA.
So I'm going to go back even a little bit further. In college, I was very much very involved in women's issues, let's call it, and didn't really think or care deeply, I would say, about the US healthcare system. I was very focused on global women's health. That was like my passion study area, if you will, and kind of thought I would tangentially work in health on the global lens, on the policy side, for the UN, for like Hillary Clinton, something like that. So that's like where I was going. And then through a whole series of interesting events, found myself trying on the tech world for size at Google. And I was there for 4 years right after college, and got thrown into specifically the brand and design side of Google, which is so interesting. I didn't know anything about brand or product design or user-centric design or any of these things, but I was always loved telling stories and writing. I was always a writer. And so the storytelling side of like, how do you tell stories that connect technology with people was the thing that was really interesting to me, and kind of be this translator between like these like crazy, brilliant software engineers and the layperson in the world who's just trying to use Google Maps on their phone or whatever it is. I thought that was a really interesting translational challenge. So I got really good at that and being that bridge between all these very different users, and thinking about how to build brands that are rooted in trust and humanness versus like code or whatever, all the guts behind a technology company. So I learned this interesting toolkit there about how to tell stories about technology, how to design better products that are user first, how to deeply bring the customer or the user's needs to these, brilliant engineers to build a better product, all those sorts of things. And while on that journey, went through my own set of women's healthcare challenges in my early 20s, living in New York City, working at the time Google's creative lab there. And it was a 3-year-long PCOS diagnosis process. So PCOS is an endocrine disorder that affects 1 in 10 women. It's a leading cause of infertility, diabetes, heart disease, a lot of chronic conditions that impact women disproportionately. And it's one of those like classic chronic conditions that are really hard to diagnose, that is like a hodgepodge set of symptoms that constantly get, let's say, stuck between the cracks of traditional healthcare. It's not, it's sort of an OBGYN issue, but it's sort of an, fertility issue. It's sort of a endocrine, primary care, like where is it? And so you kind of get stuck. And when anyone who's been through a diagnosis process or treatment for a disease or a chronic issue understands those challenges of feeling like a number, like trying to get, navigate the system. And there I was, in my early 20s trying to do this with, I often say, Google health insurance, which is the best health insurance like you can really get, and couldn't figure it out. Like I couldn't do it. Then finally, diagnosed myself and got through this. And after all that, asked myself, if I can't navigate healthcare, how does any other woman navigate this? This was like clearly not designed for women. I felt like a number. That's so fragmented. There's no soul. There's no brand or trust. This is a very intimate part of my life, and it felt highly transactional. There was, after this whole, diagnosis saga, then there was no real action plan on what to do about it. No focus on prevention. And so I asked myself, well, what if I took this playbook around user-centered design, building brands that are rooted in humanity and trust and relationships, and applied that to the most important things in people's lives, their health, and specifically women's health? Like how would the healthcare system be? What would it look like? What would it feel like? How would it work if it was actually designed with women at the center of it? And I didn't even know at the time what I know now, which is that, women control 80% of the US healthcare dollars. And, there's a real financial argument behind this, and capture the woman, you capture her family, and all of these like things that, the healthcare industry jargon that is the, financial backing for my thesis. I just kind of was a person in the world looking at the system and saying, this doesn't make any sense. And then quickly kind of became obsessed with the cobweb that is healthcare, which is, some people would describe it like banging your head against the wall every day, being like, why? I can't believe it works like this. There's no way that like this works like this. Or other people like me think it's really interesting and like that type of that cobweb and trying to untangle it all. And I would describe was my journey into, trying to connect two very different worlds and bring a playbook from one world to another, with hopes of creating something a little bit more human.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about Tia in terms of how did you mesh all these experiences together, and how did you solve for your personal experience, and what is Tia?
Yeah. I'll start with what Tia is today, and then I'll go back in time. So 4 years into this, Tia is a full service women's healthcare platform, really reimagining how women's healthcare is delivered and experienced online and offline throughout women's reproductive lives. We didn't start actually out in the care delivery space. So when I say care delivery, I mean, we actually operate brick and mortar women's healthcare practices. Our first is in New York City. We're opening additional ones soon, as well as deliver a lot of our care virtually as well. So we really think about how can we meet women where they're at, and be that front door, that trusted place they turn to handle all of your healthcare needs online and offline. But we didn't start there. We didn't start in care delivery. I didn't really know what care delivery meant. I started in a much, I would say, the vision was the same, but the solution was smaller scope. And I kind of looked at my own experience and said, what was the problem here? Well, there were so many problems, but the first problem was I had very, very poor information. And in fact, I was Googling my health. And at the time I was working on the Google Assistant, the Siri equivalent, and thought what if there was one of those for women's health that was non-ad based, it was all private and anonymous, that was trusted, that was built for women, that helped, was personalized, that was science backed. There was Google and mommy blogs and academic journals and nothing in between. And I thought, give women better information and all else will follow. So that's the first thing we built. And it was really, you might call it today a front door of care product. And that's essentially what we did. And we were actually very, very good then, and are very good now at being that front door, bringing women in the door, and saying, I'm a woman, I have a need. Where's the first place I'm going to turn with my questions? I'm going to turn to Tia. So we were very good at that. And we would answer their questions one-on-one. In the earliest days, it was my co-founder and I sitting in our living room in San Francisco, literally being Tia, messaging with women around the country, answering their healthcare questions. But we were, very squarely in this kind of WebMD territory where we could give them information, but we weren't doctors. So you couldn't prescribe, diagnose, or treat. And women liked our information so much that they wanted us to actually be their doctor. And we had, it went from me and my co-founder answering these questions to we built out a team of health educators to answer these questions, to automating a lot of it, and so on. And eventually, over 6 months, had over 200,000 one-on-one conversations with women about their health. So we were good at bringing women in the door. And then we were doing this thing where we would refer them into doctors because they wanted care. And I kind of thought to myself, if we're so good at bringing them in the door, why would we then refer them into the healthcare system that they don't really like very much? What if we became the doctor? And that was kind of the aha moment that led to the next chapter of Tia, which is, evolving to actually be what we call a full stack healthcare platform, which is we build technology, we build front door products, we give women information, but we also deliver them healthcare. And we manage them across the entire continuum, online, offline, online again, and eventually across the entire healthcare system.
Yeah, and really wrap, you said in your journey, you went to all these sources, these different specialists, and truly Tia is integrating the service level of primary care, GYN, OB, and what I call wellness and prevention all together, which is, really revolutionary, that then we don't have to go to, 4 or 5 different providers for, and integrated medicine.
One of the things we, had this idea was really interesting when we were debating becoming the doctor, if you will, and opening up a doctor's office. The question was, what does this doctor's office do? Being your OBGYN was, very obvious to us. But we had this insight around, well, what if there was a women's medical home? Women's health isn't OBGYN. It's so much more. It's primary care, it's mental health, it's all of these things. Like, what if we could put all those things together that women wanted to one integrated model? And to test this, we brought Tia app users into our office then in San Francisco of, various ages, and asked them to chat with Tia on their phone about a healthcare question that they had. And then we said, put your phone down and imagine Tia on your phone open a doctor's office. Like, what would that doctor's office be like? And every single woman's eyes lit up, and they immediately described the same thing. They'd be like, oh my God, it would be not in a medical office building. It would be, in a, kind of like this cool space that I would actually want to go to, before something is wrong. They would have, cool gowns, and it would be comfortable, and the doctors would, look you in the eye, and you would have more control over your health record. And, I could have, all of my needs met there, and everyone kind of had this vision in their mind of the exact same thing. And that was kind of the moment where I said, okay, we have to go do this. Like, women are describing the thing that's in my head before I even, made it. Why doesn't this exist yet?
Well, I want to go back to something you said that I thought was so amazing. And it's funny, we call this her story, but you talked about how you like to write and how you love to tell stories. How has that ability been important for you as a leader of Tia? I imagine that you would have to tell stories and articulate the story of Tia to many different constituents. Can you talk about that journey as a leader, and how the story to different groups, and how you've kind of gone on as a CEO and founder?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think, initially in the earliest days of a company, you have, in Tia's case, we had one customer, which was the consumer, the female, user, and then patient. And so we had to figure out how to tell a story to her, and what, instead of actually telling a story to women, we actually built a platform that let them tell their stories to us. And then we used that in a way to share those stories with the world. I think that was one of our big differentiators from a brand perspective. And I think women often feel like they're being told by other people, predominantly men, what other people think they want. And what we did is we said, I'm a woman, my co-founder is a woman, but you may want something different, and let's build a platform to let you share your story. I think that was really interesting. And then, it's evolved. And we decided to open up, become the doctors. We had to go tell stories to doctors. And that was a totally different story that we had to tell about how you're changing medicine, how you're delivering higher quality care at lower costs, how, we're using technology to, empower, not replace providers, these sorts of things. Flash forward to where, raising a Series A financing, we had to go tell a story to the investor community about why TIA is going to be $1 billion business, and why, we aren't just a cool clinic in New York City, but truly a technology platform that's changing the face of women's healthcare. And, flash forward to where we are now, which is actually, looking to, in the process of partnering with so many other constituents of healthcare, insurance companies, employers, health systems, and saying, how do we take this, our very engaged consumer, female consumer base, and deliver her a connected care experience across the entire ecosystem. And that's a very different story as well. So if I've learned one thing in healthcare, on the journey to become a healthcare founder, it's you have to figure out how to create aligned incentives between all the different customers of healthcare. And healthcare dies typically with misaligned incentives. And so if you can build a product and a business that gives women what they want, but also, benefits providers and health systems and payers and employers, and figure out how to tell all those different stories together, you have something really powerful.
Yeah. I've always felt like you were such an amazing, if you will, storyteller as a leader and visionary of how you saw women's health going. What are the other attributes, Carolyn, would you say have been so important, or lessons learned as a leader that you think are important to impart, other than just storytelling?
I think that the attributes of a leader and a founder change across every chapter. So in the earliest days, I think being a product-oriented founder who can iterate really quickly, be obsessed with insights and scrappiness and MVP and all that stuff is kind of the most important thing. And you need to have kind of laser focus on how to build getting product market fit. And then you're not so worried about the, corporate governance or building a company. And then, move to the next stage where this, figuring out how to tell your story to the world or raise capital is a different set of skills. And now TIA is 65 people. We've doubled in size since COVID started. And the skill set, the attributes that I'm needing to have and gain on the fly in many ways are much more around management and figuring out how to build a company, not just a product and a business, but a company and a culture that people want to work at, that is inspiring, is not, continues to be innovative despite, hyper growth pressures and all of that. And I think that's a totally different story. And so across all those, I would say there's a singular theme of radical simplification. I think is like one really important thing that a founder and CEO needs to have, is to be able to simplify everything. And in a business as complex as TIA's, that's really hard. But, as you get more employees, like you need to actually not say more, but say less and say it more succinctly. As you, have broader, more users, you need to be able to explain your offering in fewer words, not more words. And so I think that's a constant challenge. How can I simplify this more and more and more?
Yeah. As you kind of reflect back to your younger self, I mean, you are the CEO and founder of a women's health company that had one of the largest Series A raises in 2020. It's amazing. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs, look to you and the success that you've had to date. So if you were to kind of look back to your younger self, or if you were to give advice to some younger entrepreneurs, what advice would you give them?
Find a problem that you're obsessed with and really can't stop thinking about. I think, Tia's story and my story is one of evolution and iteration. TIA, when I jumped out of that airplane, is so different than what TIA is now. The vision of transforming women's healthcare was the same, but the how, the what and the how, I didn't know what that was. I thought I did, but I was wrong. And so I think what's kind of sustained me and allowed us to build a very successful, product that meets the needs of all these different constituents and can, evolve in real time to the continuously, changing world and pressures, COVID-19, the events of 2020. You don't stop iterating. It's like every day we're iterating is an obsession with the problem. And so when you hit rock bottom, when you feel like you can't, you just, you feel stuck, the trough of sorrow, I think they call it, that founders experience, whatever it is, you hit it, you lose that deal, you get, your 100th rejection from an investor, whatever it is, if you're, obsessed enough with the problem, I think you find a way to, iterate out of it, and continue to build something that matters, to your customer, and to uphold the vision that you want to create.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I mean, I remember you and I having one of those phone calls, right? And me kind of also talking about like those tough times, right? And over time. And so how do you kind of, if you will, what is your village, or how do you kind of find that emotional support? We all, obviously your family is one of those, but are there other people, or is there a group of people you consistently come back to, both for support, advice, development, otherwise?
Yeah. So first of all, is my co-founder. I don't think I started TIA with one of my best friends, which is a unique experience that is a beautiful one, but challenging in its own right. But it's enabled, I think, me to personally, and Tia and us collectively, to kind of hit rock bottom. And, we kind of take turns hitting rock bottom sometimes, which is valuable to have the other person like pick you back up. So having a co-founder, both in terms of sharing the workload, but the emotional burden, I think is huge. And so that's been again, she's my first person, that, sometimes you just need to vent, and that is cathartic, let's say. And when you can't really explain it to anyone else, there's like too much context. You can't possibly like call your girlfriend and just like tell them all the things that happen and have them really understand. I think that's kind of a special thing. So that's the first one. And then second, I would say, is I do have an amazing group of friends who've championed me and Tia all the way through, that sometimes get me to not talk about Tia, which is also a really great thing. Give me brain space, so that's really good too. But finding space for joy in your life outside of Tia, even though it is like my life and my baby and all of that, is a struggle, but important to not burning out, and through those tough times, especially, find the drive to keep going.
Yeah. So in the end, Carolyn, if you look at, years from now, what does success look like for you?
So success to me, I'll start it off by talking about storytelling and building a brand that women love and trust. So I'll give you my most evocative definition of success that has no dollar signs next to it or anything like that, which is creating a world that is as simple as this. In 5 years from now, or maybe it's 10, I don't know, but success is, I hope I can walk down the street of Chicago, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Atlanta, New York City, Austin, Dallas, you name it, and tap a woman on the shoulder. And she could be, 25, 35, 45, 55. And I could say, hey, hey, Lynn, what's on your mind when it comes to your health? Like, do you have a UTI? You're concerned about postpartum depression. You're worried about, anxiety, Alzheimer's, you're trying to get pregnant, trying to not get pregnant. And she just says, I turn to Tia, who takes care of the rest. That's not, I turned to my OBGYN, I Googled my health. I don't have a doctor. I don't know what to do, but healthcare is as simple as I turn to Tia, who takes care of the rest. So that to me is my very evocative vision for success.
Well, I don't think it's evocative. I think you're making that vision a reality, and it's so special. It's so clear, your passion for what drives you as a leader and what you're building today. And how you really are going to impact the healthcare system. So Carolyn, thank you so much. I know you are busy, and this truly, I think, is inspiring for many of us in terms of, again, your passion, your vision, and how you're going to seek change in this healthcare world. And it will be different after your work here. So thank you so much.